This video provides brief information about the tanks used by the armies of all major nations in combat during World War I. The Mark I tank was the world's first tank to be used in actual combat and represents a major turning point in military history. It was developed by Great Britain during the First World War as a response to the deadly stalemate of trench warfare on the Western Front. Development of the Mark I began in 1915, and it was first deployed in battle on 15 September 1916 during the Battle of the Somme in France. The main purpose of the tank was to break through enemy trench systems, crush barbed wire obstacles, and provide direct support to advancing infantry by neutralizing machine gun positions. Its distinctive rhomboid shape allowed it to cross wide trenches and rough terrain that wheeled vehicles could not overcome. The hull was fully enclosed in steel armor, offering limited protection against small arms fire and shell fragments. The Mark I was produced in two main versions, known as male and female. The male version was armed with two 57mm naval guns mounted in side sponsons, along with several machine guns, making it effective against fortified positions and enemy strongpoints. The female version carried only machine guns and was designed primarily to suppress enemy infantry. In combat, male and female tanks were often used together so that they could complement each other's strengths. The crew of the Mark I was unusually large, consisting of up to 8 men. This included a commander, drivers, transmission operators, and gunners. Conditions inside the tank were extremely harsh. Ventilation was poor, temperatures were very high due to the engine, and the interior was filled with noise, fumes, and cordite gases from firing weapons. Communication inside the tank was difficult, as there were no radios, so crew members relied on shouting and hand signals. Power was provided by a 105 horsepower Daimler gasoline engine. The tank had a maximum speed of only about 6 kilometers per hour on flat ground, making it very slow even by the standards of the time. Its combat weight was approximately 28 to 30 tons. Mechanical reliability was a serious problem. Breakdowns were frequent, and many tanks failed to reach the battlefield or became immobilized during combat due to transmission and track failures. Armor thickness ranged from about 6 to 12 millimeters, which offered protection against rifle fire and shrapnel, but was insufficient against artillery. Despite its many technical limitations, the Mark I tank had a powerful psychological effect on enemy troops who were often shocked and frightened by this new and unfamiliar weapon appearing on the battlefield. In conclusion, although the Mark I tank was slow, unreliable, and uncomfortable for its crew, its historical importance cannot be overstated. It laid the foundation for the future development of armored warfare and demonstrated the potential of tanks as a decisive battlefield weapon. The Mark I marked the beginning of a new era in military technology and played a crucial role in the evolution of modern mechanized warfare.
The Mark IV Male was a British heavy tank developed and used during the First World War and represents one of the most important early steps in the evolution of armored warfare. Introduced in 1917, the Mark IV Male was an improved version of the earlier Mark I, II, and III tanks, incorporating better armor protection, increased reliability, and simplified production. It became the most widely produced British tank of the war, with over 1,200 units built, making it a key component of Allied armored operations on the Western Front. The male designation referred specifically to the tank's armament configuration. Unlike the female variant, which was armed only with machine guns, the Mark IV Male was equipped with heavier weapons designed to destroy enemy strongpoints. Its main armament consisted of two QF 6-pounder, 57mm, naval guns mounted in side sponsons, one on each side of the hull. These guns were capable of firing high-explosive and armor-piercing shells, making the tank effective against enemy bunkers, machine gun nests, and field fortifications. In addition to its main guns, the Mark IV Male carried three 303-inch Lewis machine guns for defense against infantry at close range. The tank had a distinctive rhomboid shape, which allowed it to cross wide trenches, shell craters, and barbed wire obstacles that dominated the First World War battlefield. Its hull was constructed from riveted steel plates with armor thickness ranging from approximately 6 to 12 millimeters. This level of protection was sufficient to stop rifle fire and shrapnel, but offered limited resistance against artillery shells and anti-tank weapons, which were becoming increasingly common by the later stages of the war. The Mark IV Male weighed around 28 tons and required a crew of 8 men to operate effectively. The crew included a commander, driver, gearsman, and several gunners and loaders. Conditions inside the tank were extremely harsh. The interior was cramped, poorly ventilated, and filled with engine heat, smoke, fumes, and noise. Communication between crew members was difficult, and long combat missions often led to exhaustion and disorientation. Power was provided by a Daimler Foster 6-cylinder gasoline engine, producing approximately 105 horsepower. This engine allowed the tank to reach a maximum speed of about 6 kilometers per hour on flat ground, although its speed was usually much lower in combat conditions. The operational range was limited, typically less than 60 kilometers, which restricted its ability to conduct long, independent operations without logistical support. The Mark IV Male first saw large-scale combat during the Battle of Cambrai in November 1917, where tanks were used in concentrated numbers rather than scattered individually. This battle demonstrated the potential of armored forces to break through trench defenses when properly coordinated with infantry and artillery. Although mechanical breakdowns and enemy fire still caused heavy losses, the Mark IV proved that tanks could play a decisive role on the battlefield. In conclusion, the Mark IV Male was a significant milestone in military history. While slow, mechanically fragile, and uncomfortable for its crew, it introduced concepts of armored breakthrough and combined arms warfare that would shape future tank development. Its heavy guns, trench-crossing capability, and battlefield presence made it one of the most formidable weapons of the First World War and an essential foundation for modern armored combat vehicles. The Mark IV Female was a British heavy tank developed and used during the First World War, representing an important stage in the evolution of early armored warfare. It entered service in 1917 as an improved version of earlier British tanks, such as the Mark I, Mark II, and Mark III. The Mark IV was designed primarily to overcome the challenges of trench warfare, including barbed wire, deep trenches, and heavily defended enemy positions. The female designation referred specifically to its armament configuration, which was optimized for engaging enemy infantry rather than fortified targets. In total, approximately 1,220 Mark IV tanks were produced, of which around 595 were female variants. Unlike the male version, which carried 6-pounder cannons, the Mark IV Female was armed exclusively with machine guns. Its standard armament consisted of 5 .303 caliber Lewis machine guns mounted in side sponsons and firing ports. This configuration made the female version highly effective at suppressing and eliminating enemy infantry, particularly during assaults on trench systems and defensive lines. The Mark IV Female was a large and heavily armored vehicle for its time. It had a length of approximately 8.05 meters, a width of about 3.2 meters, and a combat weight of roughly 27 tons. The armor thickness ranged from 6 to 12 millimeters, which provided protection against small arms fire and shell fragments, though it remained vulnerable to artillery and armor-piercing weapons. The tank's rhomboid shape allowed it to cross wide trenches and climb over obstacles that wheeled vehicles could not overcome. The crew of the Mark IV Female typically consisted of 8 men, including a commander, a driver, gearsmen, and several machine gunners. Operating conditions inside the tank were extremely difficult. The interior was cramped, poorly ventilated, and filled with engine heat, exhaust fumes, and noise. Communication between crew members was challenging, often relying on hand signals or shouting over the sound of the engine and gunfire. Power was provided by a Daimler 105 horsepower petrol engine, which allowed the tank to reach a maximum speed of around 6.4 kilometers per hour on flat ground. Although slow, this speed was considered acceptable for infantry support roles. The operational range was approximately 56 kilometers, depending on terrain and fuel conditions. Steering the tank required significant physical effort and coordination among the crew, reflecting the mechanical limitations of early tank design. The Mark IV female saw extensive combat use, most notably during the Battle of Cambrai in November 1917, where tanks were deployed in large numbers for the first time in history. In these engagements, female tanks played a crucial role in neutralizing enemy infantry and protecting advancing British troops. Their machine gun fire helped clear trenches and repel counterattacks, demonstrating the tactical value of specialized tank variants working alongside male tanks. Today, several Mark IV female tanks survive in museums and historical collections, serving as important reminders of the origins of armored warfare. Notable preserved examples include the famous tank Deborah, recovered from Flesquières in France, as well as vehicles displayed in museums in the United Kingdom and Australia. These surviving tanks provide valuable insight into the technological and tactical innovations of World War I. In conclusion, the Mark IV female was a key component of Britain's early tank forces. Its machine gun-focused design, heavy armor for the period, and ability to support infantry assaults made it an essential weapon in trench warfare. Although primitive by modern standards, it played a significant role in shaping the future development of armored combat and military strategy. The Mark V tank was one of the most important and advanced British heavy tanks of the First World War. It was introduced in 1917 and entered active service in 1918, being developed specifically to overcome the major weaknesses identified in earlier British tanks such as the Mark I, II, III, and IV. The most significant improvement of the Mark V was its new transmission and steering system, which allowed the tank to be controlled by a single driver. In earlier models, several crew members were required to manage gears and steering, but in the Mark V, this process was simplified, greatly improving battlefield efficiency and reducing crew workload. The Mark V had the characteristic rhomboid-shaped hull typical of early British tanks, designed to cross wide trenches and heavily cratered terrain. The tank weighed approximately 29 tons and measured about 8 meters in length, around 4 meters in width, and roughly 2.5 meters in height. Its armor thickness ranged from 6 to 12 millimeters, which provided protection against small arms fire and shell fragments, although it remained vulnerable to heavy artillery. Despite this limitation, the level of armor was considered adequate for the conditions of trench warfare at the time. Power was provided by a Ricardo 6-cylinder gasoline engine, producing about 150 horsepower. This engine was more powerful and reliable than those used in earlier British tanks. The Mark V had a maximum speed of approximately 7 to 8 kilometers per hour on roads and a shorter operational speed in rough terrain. Its operational range was around 70 kilometers, allowing it to support infantry operations for extended periods without frequent refueling. In terms of armament, the Mark V was produced in several configurations. The male version was equipped with two 57mm or 6-pounder cannons mounted in side sponsons, along with several machine guns. This version was intended to engage enemy strongpoints, bunkers, and machine gun nests. The female version, by contrast, was armed only with machine guns and was designed primarily for anti-infantry roles. There was also a composite version which combined one 57mm cannon on one side with machine guns on the other, offering greater tactical flexibility. The typical crew consisted of 8 men, including the commander, driver, gunners, and mechanics. The Mark V saw extensive combat use in 1918, particularly during major Allied offensives such as the Battle of Amiens. In these operations, it played a key role in breaking through German defensive lines and supporting infantry advances.
The improved reliability and easier handling of the Mark V made it far more effective than earlier British tanks, and its presence on the battlefield had a strong psychological impact on enemy troops. In conclusion, the Mark V tank represented the peak of British heavy tank development during the First World War. Its improved engine, simplified controls, and effective armament made it one of the most successful tanks of its era. The experience gained from the Mark V directly influenced post-war tank design and laid important foundations for the development of modern armored warfare.
The Mark A Whippet was a British medium tank developed during the First World War, designed to complement the slower and heavier Mark IV and Mark V tanks by providing speed and maneuverability. Its name, Whippet, was derived from a breed of fast-running dog, reflecting the tank's primary purpose as a rapid and mobile weapon. Design work on the Whippet began in 1916, and by late 1917, the tank was ready for production. It first saw combat in 1918, making it one of the earliest examples of a fast tank concept that would influence future armored warfare doctrines. The Mark A Whippet differed significantly from the large, cumbersome rhomboid tanks of the time. It was smaller, had a low silhouette, and featured a relatively simple hull design. The tank's layout placed the engine compartment at the front and the fighting compartment towards the rear, which offered some protection for the crew, but resulted in higher interior temperatures and noise levels due to the front-mounted engine. It was powered by two separate gasoline engines, each driving one set of tracks independently, which gave the tank excellent turning capability and enhanced speed compared to its heavier counterparts. In terms of armament, the Whippet was primarily intended for infantry support rather than tank-to-tank combat. It carried four 7.7mm .303 British Hotchkiss or Vickers machine guns mounted around the hull to provide almost all-around fire coverage. While it lacked a main gun capable of engaging enemy armor effectively, its machine guns were sufficient to suppress enemy infantry and support rapid attacks. The Whippet's role focused on exploiting breakthroughs, conducting swift raids behind enemy lines, and disrupting enemy formations rather than engaging in direct confrontations with fortified positions. The armor protection of the Whippet was moderate for the time. Its armor thickness ranged from approximately 8 to 14 millimeters, sufficient to resist small arms fire and light shrapnel, but vulnerable to heavy artillery and anti-tank weapons. The crew typically consisted of 3 to 4 men, including a commander, driver, and machine gunners. Interior conditions were cramped, hot, and extremely noisy, which made extended operations physically demanding for the crew. Mobility was the Whippet's greatest advantage. It could reach speeds of approximately 13 to 14 kilometers per hour, considerably faster than the heavier British tanks of the era. Its off-road capability allowed it to cross trenches and navigate uneven terrain effectively. With a range of around 130 kilometers, the Whippet could conduct extended raids behind enemy lines, striking unexpectedly and creating disruption in rear areas. The Whippet's effectiveness during combat operations in 1918, particularly in the Battle of Amiens. During these actions, Whippet tanks carried out rapid assaults, targeting enemy infantry positions and supply lines, and operating independently in some cases for extended periods. These operations demonstrated the potential of mechanized, fast-moving armored units and laid the groundwork for the concept of cavalry tanks and modern mechanized forces. In conclusion, the Mark A Whippet holds an important place in the history of World War I as a fast and maneuverable tank. It demonstrated that tanks could serve not only as slow, breakthrough weapons, but also as agile, mobile forces capable of exploiting gaps in enemy lines. Its design and operational experience influenced future generations of armored vehicles and contributed significantly to the development of modern armored warfare doctrines.
The Chamond tank was a French heavy tank developed and used during World War I, representing one of France's earliest attempts to introduce armored fighting vehicles into modern warfare. It was designed in 1916 and entered service in April 1917, at a time when the trench warfare stalemate on the Western Front demanded new technological solutions. The tank was produced by the Compagnie des Forges et Aciéries de la Marine et d'Aumecourt,
whose main industrial facilities were located in the town of Saint-Chamond, from which the vehicle took its name. The development of the Saint-Chamond tank was strongly influenced by industrial and political factors rather than purely military requirements. Unlike the Schneider CA1, which was also in service with the French Army, the Saint-Chamond was built on an elongated chassis and emphasized firepower over mobility. Its design reflected the French belief that a tank should act as a mobile artillery platform capable of destroying enemy fortifications and machine gun nests from a distance. The most distinctive feature of the Saint-Chamond tank was its main armament, a powerful 75mm Canon de 75 Modèle 1897 field gun mounted in the front hull. This gun was one of the most effective artillery pieces of the war and gave the Saint-Chamond excellent firepower compared to other early tanks. In addition to the main gun, the tank was armed with 4 8mm Hotchkiss machine guns, providing defensive fire against enemy infantry on all sides. In terms of construction, the Saint-Chamond had a long, box-shaped hull with significant overhang at the front and rear. This design caused major operational problems, particularly in trench warfare, as the tank frequently became stuck when attempting to cross wide trenches or uneven terrain. The suspension and track system were based on the Holt tractor design, but the tracks were too short for the length of the vehicle, which severely reduced its cross-country performance. The tank's armor protection ranged from 11 to 17 millimeters, which was sufficient to stop small arms fire and shell fragments, but offered limited protection against artillery and armor-piercing rounds. The crew typically consisted of 8 to 9 men, including a commander, gunner, loader, driver, and machine gun operators. Inside the tank, conditions were extremely difficult. Visibility was poor, ventilation was inadequate, and heat, smoke, and engine fumes made prolonged combat operations exhausting and dangerous for the crew. The Saint-Chamond was powered by a 90-horsepower gasoline engine, allowing it to reach a maximum speed of approximately 12 kilometers per hour on roads, though its off-road speed was much lower. Its operational range was around 60 kilometers, depending on terrain and fuel conditions. Steering was achieved through a combination of track braking and an innovative but complex electric transmission system, which proved unreliable under battlefield conditions. The Saint-Chamond tank saw combat for the first time during the Nivelle offensive in April 1917, where it suffered heavy losses due to mechanical failures, difficult terrain, and intense German artillery fire. While its gun proved effective when the tank could reach firing positions, its poor mobility limited its tactical value. As the war progressed, several improvements were made, including wider tracks and minor armor modifications, but these changes could not fully overcome the fundamental design flaws. By late 1918, the Saint-Chamond was increasingly overshadowed by more practical and better balanced designs, such as the Renault FT, which introduced the modern tank layout with a rotating turret. Although the Saint-Chamond was not a complete success, it played a significant role in the early evolution of armored warfare and provided valuable lessons in tank design, particularly regarding the balance between firepower, protection, and mobility. In conclusion, the Saint-Chamond tank stands as a significant but flawed example of early tank development during World War I. Its powerful armament and ambitious design demonstrated France's industrial capability and willingness to innovate, while its operational shortcomings highlighted the challenges faced by early armored vehicles in the harsh conditions of trench warfare. The Renault FT was a revolutionary French light tank that played a significant role during World War I and influenced tank design for decades. Developed by the Renault company under the guidance of engineer Louis Renault in 1917, the FT was one of the first tanks to feature a fully rotating turret, a concept that became standard in future tank designs. Unlike earlier tanks, which were often large, slow, and difficult to maneuver, the Renault FT was small, relatively light, and highly mobile, making it suitable for the varied terrain of the Western Front. Its compact size, weighing approximately 6.5 tons, allowed it to traverse trenches, shell craters, and rough ground more effectively than heavier vehicles. The tank was powered by a 39-horsepower Renault V4 engine, which enabled it to reach a top speed of about 7.5 kilometers per hour on rough terrain and up to 9 kilometers per hour on roads. It had a range of roughly 60 kilometers before requiring refueling, which was adequate for tactical battlefield operations. The Renault FT's armor thickness ranged from 8 mm to 22 mm, providing protection against small arms fire and shrapnel, but leaving it vulnerable to heavier artillery and anti-tank weapons. Its small profile and low weight contributed to its survivability and ease of transport. One of the most notable features of the Renault FT was its armament. It was produced in two main variants, one equipped with a 37mm Pitot SA-18 gun suitable for engaging enemy positions in light vehicles, and another fitted with a 7.92mm Hotchkiss M1914 machine gun effective against infantry. The rotating turret allowed the crew to aim independently of the tank's movement, giving it a tactical advantage in combat. The vehicle was operated by a two-man crew consisting of a driver and a commander/gunner, which simplified internal communication and coordination. The Renault FT's design emphasized maneuverability and practical battlefield utility. Its suspension system consisted of horizontal leaf springs with a tail skid at the rear, which improved stability over uneven ground. Tracks ran the full length of the tank, providing better traction and enabling it to cross obstacles. The tank's compact dimensions, approximately 5 meters in length, 1.74 meters in width, and 2.14 meters in height, allowed it to operate in constrained environments, unlike the cumbersome heavy tanks of the era. Production of the Renault FT began in 1917, and by the end of World War I, over 3,700 units had been manufactured, making it the most produced tank of the war. Its effectiveness and innovative design had a lasting influence, inspiring post-war tank development in multiple countries, including the United States, the Soviet Union, and Japan. Beyond World War I, Renault FTs saw service in various conflicts during the 1920s and 1930s, and even in the early stages of World War II in secondary roles. Many were sold to foreign armies and used as training vehicles or light combat tanks. In conclusion, the Renault FT was a groundbreaking light tank that combined mobility, practical armor, and innovative firepower in a compact design. Its fully rotating turret, two-man crew layout, and balanced engineering set a new standard for tank design, influencing armored vehicle development worldwide for decades. The tank's operational history demonstrates the transition from experimental armored vehicles to practical, versatile combat machines that could adapt to modern warfare, making the Renault FT an iconic and historically significant vehicle in military history.
The Schneider CA1 was the first operational French tank and one of the earliest tanks used in combat during the First World War. It was developed by the French industrial company Schneider CA1 in cooperation with SOMUA and entered service in 1916. A total of approximately 400 Schneider CA1 tanks were produced, and they were used primarily by the French Army between 1916 and 1918. After the war, some vehicles continued to serve in other countries, notably Spain, where they remained in use into the 1930s. The development of the Schneider CA1 was driven by the urgent need to break the stalemate of trench warfare on the Western Front. Traditional infantry assaults were suffering extremely high casualties due to machine guns, barbed wire, and fortified enemy positions. French military planners sought a tracked armored vehicle capable of crossing trenches, crushing obstacles, and providing direct fire support to advancing infantry. As a result, the Schneider CA1 was designed as an assault tank rather than a fast or maneuverable vehicle. In terms of construction, the Schneider CA1 had a box-shaped armored hull mounted on a tracked chassis. Its design was heavily influenced by contemporary artillery tractors. The tank lacked a rotating turret, and its main armament was mounted in the front right side of the hull.
The primary weapon was a short-barreled 75mm Schneider blockhouse gun designed to destroy enemy strongpoints, machine gun nests, and barbed wire defenses. In addition to the main gun, the tank was equipped with two 8mm Hotchkiss M1914 machine guns mounted on the sides to provide close-range defense against enemy infantry. The crew of the Schneider CA1 consisted of 6 men: a commander, a driver, a main gunner, 2 machine gunners, and a mechanic. The internal layout was very cramped and uncomfortable, with poor ventilation and high temperatures caused by the engine and weapons fire. Communication between crew members was difficult, and battlefield visibility was limited, which reduced overall combat effectiveness. Technically, the Schneider CA1 weighed between 13.5 and 14.6 tons. It had a length of approximately 6.3 meters, a width of about 2.05 meters, and a height of around 2.3 meters. The tank was powered by a Schneider 4-cylinder gasoline engine producing about 60 horsepower. This allowed a maximum speed of roughly 8 kilometers per hour on roads, although its speed in rough terrain was significantly lower. Its operational range varied between 30 and 80 kilometers, depending on terrain and fuel conditions. The armor of the Schneider CA1 was relatively thin by later standards. The maximum armor thickness was about 11 millimeters, which provided protection against small arms fire and shell fragments, but was vulnerable to artillery and armor-piercing ammunition. As the war progressed and German forces introduced armor-piercing bullets, additional armor plates of approximately 5.5 millimeters were added to some vehicles to improve protection. The Schneider CA1 saw its first combat use on 16 April 1917 during the Nivelle offensive. These early combat deployments were largely unsuccessful, as many tanks were destroyed by artillery or became immobilized due to mechanical failures and difficult terrain. However, later in the war, especially in 1918, the Schneider CA1 played a more effective role when used in better planned combined arms operations alongside infantry and artillery. After World War I, most Schneider CA1 tanks were retired from French service. Some were sold or transferred to other countries, including Spain, where they were used during the Rif War and appeared briefly at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. Today, only one original Schneider CA1 survives, preserved and restored at the Musée des Blindes in Saumur, France. In conclusion, although the Schneider CA1 had many limitations, such as poor mobility, weak armor, and cramped internal conditions, it represented a major technological breakthrough for the French army. As France's first tank, it laid the foundation for future armored vehicle development and played an important role in the early history of armored warfare.
The Sturmpanzerwagen A7V was the only German heavy tank to be produced in series during the First World War and represents Germany's first practical attempt at building a tracked armored fighting vehicle. The designation A7V was derived from Allgemeines Kriegsdepartement Abteilung Verkehrswesen, the office responsible for its development. The tank was designed in 1917 and saw limited combat use on the Western Front in 1918. The overall design of the A7V was very distinctive and differed greatly from contemporary British and French tanks. It had a tall, box-shaped armored hull mounted on a tracked chassis originally based on a Holt tractor suspension. The hull was constructed from riveted steel armor plates and gave the vehicle a very high silhouette, making it clearly visible on the battlefield. The A7V was intended primarily for infantry support, with the task of breaking through enemy defensive positions and suppressing machine gun nests. In terms of dimensions and weight, the A7V was a large and heavy vehicle. Its combat weight was approximately 30 to 33 tons. The tank was about 7.3 meters long, 3.1 meters wide, and around 3.3 meters high. One of its most notable characteristics was its extremely large crew, consisting of up to 18 men, including a commander, drivers, mechanics, gunners, and machine gun operators. This was the largest crew of any tank used during the First World War and reflected the complexity and manual operation of its systems.
The armament of the A7V was relatively powerful for its time. Its main weapon was a 57mm Nordenfeldt gun mounted in the front of the hull, capable of engaging enemy infantry, field fortifications, and light armored targets. In addition, the tank was equipped with 6 7.92mm MG08 machine guns positioned on the sides and rear of the hull, allowing all-around defensive fire. While this heavy armament provided strong firepower, the internal fighting compartment was extremely cramped, noisy, and poorly ventilated, which made crew operations difficult during combat. Armor protection was one of the stronger aspects of the A7V. The frontal armor was up to 30mm thick, while the side and rear armor ranged from 15 to 20mm. This level of protection was generally sufficient against small arms fire and light machine guns, but it offered limited resistance against artillery fire and anti-tank weapons, which were becoming more common by the end of the war. The A7V was powered by 2 Daimler-Benz gasoline engines, each producing around 100 horsepower for a combined output of approximately 200 horsepower. This allowed the tank to reach a maximum speed of about 12 to 15 kilometers per hour on roads, although its speed was significantly reduced on rough or muddy terrain. The vehicle had a high fuel consumption and a limited operational range. Its suspension and track system were not well suited to crossing wide trenches or heavily cratered ground, which was a major disadvantage on the Western Front. Operationally, the Sturmpanzerwagen A7V had a limited impact on the course of the war. A total of just 20 units were built, and they were deployed in small numbers during German offensives in 1918. Despite this, the A7V is historically significant because it participated in the world's first recorded tank-versus-tank battle. On 24 April 1918, near Villers-Bretonneux in France, an A7V engaged British Mark IV tanks, demonstrating for the first time the direct combat potential of armored vehicles against one another. In conclusion, the Sturmpanzerwagen A7V was an ambitious but flawed design. Its high silhouette, heavy weight, mechanical unreliability, and poor cross-country mobility limited its effectiveness in combat. Nevertheless, it marked a crucial first step in German tank development and provided valuable experience that influenced later armored vehicle concepts. As such, the A7V holds an important place in the history of military technology as one of the earliest heavy tanks to see combat.